At 20, love feels like oxygen. You chase it. You fear losing it. You build your identity around it. But after 50, something changes. You've already paid the price. You've loved. You've compromised. You've stayed too long. You've learned, sometimes the hard way, that not every connection brings peace, and not every relationship is worth the cost. Society tells you that growing older means you should be afraid of being alone, that without a partner, something must be missing, that companionship is always better than solitude. Stoicism challenges that assumption, not because love is bad, but because dependence is dangerous. At this stage of life, peace becomes more valuable than pleasure. Time becomes more precious than approval. And freedom, mental, emotional, spiritual, becomes non-negotiable. This video is not about hating women, it's not about bitterness, and it's not about closing your heart, it's about clarity. Today, we'll explore 6 Stoic reasons why many men over 50 choose not to have a girlfriend, and why this decision, when made consciously, can lead to a calmer mind, stronger boundaries, and a deeper sense of self-respect. These are not rules. They are reflections. Take what serves you. Leave what doesn't. And if at any point you feel uncomfortable, that's not an attack. That's awareness. Stay with me until the end, because the final insight may completely change how you define freedom in the second half of your life. If peace matters more to you than pressure, you're in the right place. 1. Peace becomes more valuable than pleasure. When you're young, pleasure feels like progress. Intensity feels like meaning. Drama feels like passion. But with age, something quietly shifts. You begin to notice that the moments you value most are not the loud ones. They're the calm ones. The mornings without tension, the evenings without arguments, the days where your nervous system is not constantly on edge. Peace stops being boring. It becomes rare, and anything rare becomes valuable. Many men over 50 don't avoid relationships because they're afraid of commitment. They avoid them because they've learned the real cost. Not financial, not social, emotional. A relationship, by default, introduces friction. Different moods, different expectations, different needs. And when you've already spent decades navigating conflict, you begin to ask a serious question. Is this adding calm or subtracting it? Stoic philosophy never promised a life of pleasure. It promised a life of tranquility, inner steadiness regardless of external noise, and tranquility doesn't coexist well with constant emotional turbulence. After 50, you're no longer interested in proving you're desirable. You're interested in sleeping well, thinking clearly, moving through your days without unnecessary disturbances. This is where many men make a quiet, unpopular decision. They choose peace over pleasure, not because pleasure is wrong, but because pleasure is fleeting, while peace compounds. A relationship that constantly demands reassurance, emotional labor, or compromise of your core routines slowly drains you. Not all at once, but steadily. And at this stage of life, steady drains are dangerous. You don't recover energy the way you used to. You don't bounce back from stress the same way, and you no longer see conflict as part of the game. You see it for what it is, a tax on your remaining years. Stoicism teaches that external things are neutral. What matters is their effect on your inner state. If something repeatedly disturbs your equilibrium, it doesn't matter how pleasurable it looks on the surface. It's too expensive. This is why many men after 50 become extremely selective, or opt out entirely. They've learned that peace is fragile, and once you finally build it, you protect it fiercely. This isn't bitterness, it's wisdom earned through repetition. You've already lived through arguments that went nowhere, through emotional cycles that never resolved, through compromises that cost more than they gave. So now, instead of chasing stimulation, you ask a deeper question. Does this bring calm into my life? or chaos disguised as connection? And if the answer isn't clear, the Stoic response is simple. You don't engage, because what costs your peace is never worth the pleasure it promises. At 50, you're not running out of love. You're running out of tolerance for unnecessary disturbance. And choosing peace isn't giving up on life. It's finally understanding how precious it is. 2. Emotional independence is hard won. Emotional independence is not something you're born with. It's something you earn, slowly, painfully, over time. Most men don't realize how dependent they are until something is taken away. A relationship ends. Affection is withdrawn. Silence replaces attention, and suddenly, the mind collapses inward. After 50, many men have already been through this cycle more than once. They've felt what it's like to give someone else access to their emotional center, and then lose control of it. Stoicism teaches a simple but uncomfortable truth. The moment your peace depends on another person, your freedom is gone. Not because the other person is evil, but because dependency always creates imbalance. When you need someone to validate you, to reassure you, to regulate your emotions, you've handed them power, whether they asked for it or not. Earlier in life, this feels normal, even romantic. But later in life, it feels dangerous, because you finally learned how hard it was to build stability on your own. You've learned how to wake up without anxiety, how to enjoy silence, how to move through your day without needing permission, praise, or constant feedback. And once you experience that level of inner autonomy, you become protective of it. Many men over 50 don't avoid girlfriends because they can't connect. They avoid them because they can. And they know the cost. They know how easily emotional entanglement pulls them back into old patterns, explaining themselves, managing moods, absorbing stress that isn't theirs. Patterns they spent years unlearning. Stoic philosophy emphasizes mastery of the self above all else. Not control over others, not emotional fusion, self-mastery. And emotional independence is a core pillar of that mastery. It means your mood doesn't rise and fall based on someone else's attention. It means rejection doesn't shake your identity. It means solitude doesn't threaten you. This doesn't make you cold. It makes you grounded. After 50, many men realize something critical. They don't want to be needed. They want to be aligned. And alignment is rare. It requires two whole individuals, not two emotional gaps trying to fill each other. Most relationships later in life don't offer that. They offer comfort mixed with subtle dependency. And dependency, even when wrapped in affection, slowly erodes inner strength. So some men choose a different path. They choose to keep their emotional center self-contained, unnegotiable, untouched by volatility. Not because they fear closeness, but because they finally respect their own stability. Stoicism doesn't teach you to isolate. It teaches you to remain sovereign. And sovereignty begins when no one else gets to decide how you feel. This is why emotional independence, once earned, is rarely surrendered. Because freedom that took decades to build is not easily given away again. 3. Time is no longer renewable. When you're young, time feels unlimited. You spend it freely. You waste it casually. You assume there will always be more. After 50, that illusion is gone. You don't panic about time, but you respect it. Every hour now carries weight. Every commitment is a trade. Every distraction costs you something real. Stoic philosophers understood this long before modern life made it obvious. They warned that it's not death we should fear, but the quiet theft of our days. At this stage of life, relationships are no longer just emotional choices. They are time decisions. Dating requires attention. Conversations require energy. Misunderstandings require repair. And none of that is free. Many men over 50 look back and realize how much time they already gave away. to arguments that changed nothing, to emotional loops that went nowhere, to relationships that consumed years without building peace. So now, a different question appears. Is this worth my remaining time? Not, is she attractive? Not, will people approve? But does this deserve my hours, my focus, my life force? Stoicism teaches that time is the one resource you never truly own. You only borrow it, briefly, and what you give your time to becomes your life. That's why many men after 50 become radically selective. They no longer tolerate long emotional negotiations, repeated misunderstandings, cycles that demand explanation instead of clarity, because each of those things consumes the one thing they cannot replace: time. A girlfriend isn't just a companion. She becomes part of your daily structure, your schedule, your mental space. And if that structure doesn't add clarity, it fragments it. At 50, fragmentation feels expensive. You don't want your attention split. You don't want your evenings negotiated. You don't want your routines disrupted unless the return is undeniable. Stoicism isn't anti-relationship, it's anti-waste. It asks you to live deliberately, to spend your time where it aligns with your values. And for many men, solitude begins to look like alignment, not because they've given up on connection, but because they've stopped giving time to things that dilute them. They've learned that peace requires space, reflection requires quiet, growth requires uninterrupted focus. And relationships, even good ones, often compete with that. So some men make a conscious decision. They protect their mornings, they protect their evenings, they protect their mental bandwidth. They invest time in health, discipline, learning, and stillness. Things that compound rather than drain. Because at 50, you're not counting years anymore. You're counting quality. And once you understand that time is no longer renewable, you stop spending it on anything that doesn't respect it. That realization alone changes everything. 4. Most relationships after 50 are negotiated, not built. When you're young, relationships are built, slowly, organically. Two people grow together, adapt together, become something new together. After 50, that's rarely the case. Most relationships at this stage aren't built from the ground up. They're negotiated. Each person arrives with a full life already formed. Habits hardened by decades, beliefs reinforced by experience, wounds that never fully healed. Nothing is neutral anymore. There are expectations about time, about money, about independence, about space. And every one of those expectations requires compromise. Stoicism doesn't judge this reality. It simply sees it clearly. After 50, love often becomes a series of agreements. How often you see each other, how much space you get, how involved you are in each other's lives, what you tolerate and what you don't. None of that is wrong. But it's not effortless. And effort, when it doesn't align with your nature, becomes friction. Many men reach a point where they no longer want to negotiate their peace. They've already done that for decades. At work, in family, in prior relationships. They're tired of bargaining for quiet. Tired of explaining routines that already work. Tired of adjusting a life they finally stabilized. Negotiated relationships often carry hidden pressure, unspoken resentment, subtle power. Struggles emotional bookkeeping, who gives more, who compromises more, who adapts. At 50, these questions don't feel romantic, they feel exhausting. Stoicism values harmony, but harmony built on clarity, not constant adjustment. When a relationship requires you to repeatedly bend your boundaries, it slowly erodes self-respect. Not dramatically, quietly. And quiet erosion is the most dangerous kind. Many men realize that after 50, relationships rarely offer transformation. They offer accommodation, and accommodation over time can feel like contraction. You start making room, but nothing expands. Your routines shrink, your solitude shrinks, your inner quiet shrinks. Until one day, you realize you've negotiated yourself away. This is why some men choose to opt out entirely. Not because relationships are impossible, but because the cost-benefit equation has changed. They no longer want to manage another adult's expectations. They no longer want to coordinate lives that don't naturally align. They no longer want to renegotiate their identity. Stoicism teaches that a good life is one lived in accordance with nature, your nature. And for many men after 50, their nature is already defined. They know their rhythm, they know their limits, they know what disturbs their equilibrium. So instead of forcing compatibility, they choose coherence, a life that doesn't require explanation, a structure that doesn't require negotiation, a peace that doesn't depend on agreement. Negotiated peace is still fragile peace, and once you've tasted a life without constant adjustment, you become very careful about reintroducing it. That's not fear, that's discernment. 5. Solitude sharpens the mind. Most people fear solitude because they confuse it with emptiness. They assume that being alone means something is missing. Stoicism sees it differently. Solitude is not absence, it is space, and space is where the mind becomes sharp again. After 50, many men discover something unexpected. When they remove constant emotional input, opinions, expectations, conversations, negotiations, their thinking clears. Noise disappears. Focus returns. You begin to hear your own thoughts without interference. In relationships, especially later in life, the mind is rarely quiet. Even good relationships create mental movement, anticipating reactions, adjusting tone, managing emotional weather. It's subtle, but constant. Solitude removes that layer, and when it's gone, something powerful happens. You start thinking in complete sentences again. Your decisions feel cleaner. Your intuition becomes sharper. Stoic philosophers valued solitude not as escape, but as training. A man alone with his thoughts either collapses or becomes formidable. After 50, many men finally have the maturity to choose the second path. They use solitude to read deeply instead of skimming, opinions reflect instead of reacting, strengthen the body without distraction, observe the mind without interruption. This is not isolation, it's intentional withdrawal. A controlled environment where the mind can recalibrate. Modern society treats constant connection as health. Stoicism treats self-command as health, and self-command requires silence. Many men realize that when they are alone, they are not lonely. They are undisturbed, undisturbed enough to notice patterns they ignored for years, undisturbed enough to question assumptions they inherited, undisturbed enough to refine their values without compromise. In solitude, you stop performing. There's no audience, no feedback loop, just you and what you actually believe. That's uncomfortable at first, but discomfort in Stoicism is a forge. Over time, solitude sharpens discernment. You become less reactive, less impressionable, less emotionally porous. You no longer need stimulation to feel alive. You no longer seek validation to feel whole. And this changes how you see relationships. Instead of asking, "What can this give me?" you ask, "What would this take from me?" If a relationship interrupts your thinking, fractures your routines, pulls you away from clarity, it becomes obvious. Solitude, on the other hand, gives without demand. It gives depth. It gives perspective. It gives strength. This is why many men after 50 protect their alone time fiercely. Not because they reject others, but because they've discovered who they become when no one is pulling on their attention. And they like that man. Stoicism doesn't teach you to hide from the world. It teaches you to return to it sharpened. Solitude is not the end state. It's the whetstone. And once your mind has been sharpened, you become very careful about anything that might dull it again. 6. You no longer need to prove anything. When you're younger, much of life is performance. You prove your value through ambition. You prove your worth through relationships. You prove your masculinity through desire, conquest, attention. Even love becomes a stage. After 50, that urge begins to fade. Not because you failed, but because you finally understand. You've already proven enough. You've built things. You've lost things. You've survived things that once felt impossible. And somewhere along the way, a quiet realization appears. Nothing meaningful changes if you stop trying to impress. Stoicism teaches that the need to prove yourself is a form of dependence. It ties your identity to external reaction, applause, validation, attraction, and the moment you stop needing those signals, something inside you stabilizes. Many men pursue relationships later in life, not out of love, but out of reassurance. Reassurance that they're still wanted, still relevant, still capable of being chosen. But reassurance is a fragile fuel. It never lasts. Each relationship becomes another test, another mirror, another place where your value feels negotiable again. After 50, many men see through this loop. They no longer want to audition for affection. They no longer want to be evaluated. They no longer want to shape themselves to be palatable. Stoicism doesn't ask, do they want you? It asks, are you living in alignment with your character? That question changes everything. When you stop proving, you stop chasing. When you stop chasing, you stop tolerating disrespect. When you stop tolerating, your standards rise naturally. This is why some men choose not to have a girlfriend at this stage. Not because they're closed, but because they're complete. They don't need someone to confirm their worth. They don't need attraction to justify their existence. They don't need a relationship to feel alive. They already know who they are when no one is watching. And that knowledge is grounding. It allows them to live simply, to speak less, to choose carefully. Relationships built on proving require constant maintenance, constant signaling, constant reassurance. But a man who no longer needs to prove anything is dangerous to that dynamic. He won't compete. He won't explain himself. He won't negotiate his identity. He either fits or he walks away in silence. Stoicism calls this sovereignty, not isolation, not arrogance. Sovereignty. The ability to stand on your own character without borrowing meaning from another person. After 50, many men realize that freedom doesn't come from having options. It comes from not needing them. And once you reach that point, having no girlfriend doesn't feel like loss. It feels like clarity. It feels like space. It feels like living without an audience. And a life without an audience is often the most honest life a man can live. At this point, you may have noticed something important. None of these reasons are about fear. None of them are about resentment, and none of them are about closing yourself off from life. They are about choice. After 50, life stops asking you to accumulate. It asks you to refine. You've seen why many men choose peace over pleasure, why emotional independence becomes sacred, why time is treated like a non-renewable asset, why relationships later in life often require negotiation rather than growth, why solitude sharpens the mind instead of weakening it, and why, eventually, the need to prove anything simply falls away. Stoicism doesn't tell you to avoid love. It teaches you to never sacrifice your peace for it. If a relationship adds clarity, stability, and alignment, Stoicism has no objection. But if it costs your tranquility, your discipline, your self-command, the Stoic answer is restraint, not bitterness, not anger. Restraint. Because the second half of life is not about intensity. It's about integrity. It's about waking up without tension, living without unnecessary explanation, and ending each day with your inner world intact. If this message resonated with you, leave a comment below with the words, Peace over pressure. If you know someone who's struggling with this question, share this video with them. And if you're walking this path of clarity, discipline, and quiet strength, subscribe. Because the strongest men are not the loudest ones, they are the calmest, and calm is power.